I keep doing this. I gotta not do this. This is a thing that I do too much. I gotta not do it. Hello and welcome back to Tabletop Archives, where I go over world building tips and tools and also just get world building done because I'm lazy and I wanna, grow this YouTube channel, so hopefully people are watching this. My name's Frank, and if you haven't seen any of our previous videos, go ahead and check them out after this one, of course, because algorithms. Today we're going to be going over races in D&D, specifically how I have decided races work in my world. Wizards of the Coast have decided to come up with more and more new races almost every book. It seems like whenever a new book gets published, new races get published in that book. In fact, I believe in the newest book to come out, the Greek mythology one, we'll see if we have an image up on the screen, it's going to feature two new races, basically a lion folk, which is weird because we already have tabaxis, and the satyrs, and thus makes it even more difficult to comprehend how that works. If you're a DM like me who's tried to keep the same homebrew world for multiple years, it can get exhausting with how often you have to update these things. I mean, they keep bringing in new races, and it's not even just races that you would expect them to bring in, like when we go and get that null race wizards. It's these weirder races that you don't think anyone's gonna play, and then you realize they have really good stats. For example, the Eberron book came out, and it's pretty fun, pretty good, enjoy a lot of it, we get a new class out of that. I've had one player in particular who just wants to keep playing those races, the Artificer. I've had the Warforged come up constantly. It can get daunting having to keep up with all of that. Especially if you want to have the races mean something in your world. How do you justify that? How do you fit all of that in? And sure, if you don't care, it could just be play whatever race you want. But if you're trying to create some sort of cohesion within your world, you want there to be something that the players can latch on to be like, I understand, tabaxis come from this part of your world, and these Kalashtar come from here. So I want to go over what I do to help mitigate that a little bit, to make it easier for both me and the players. So I want to go over how I do races that typically comes in the form of three different things. There's the main races that exist in an area, there's the available everywhere races, and the limited races. So the first thing I do is I determine what continent I'm going to be starting on, and then I decide what races belong in that continent. Now this ultimately depends on the themes that I'm trying to go for. What makes sense? Which races would be naturally in there? For example, I have a continent called Dolaris, and that is my traditional fantasy setting. That's I want a generic Lord of the Rings fantasy setting. Here's where the campaign's going to take place. So in there, I have basically most of your generic races. Your elves, humans, dwarves, halflings, the ones you expect from Lord of the Rings. But then you go to another continent, say, let's go to Akan, the continent where the Kingdom of Shattered Earth takes place. Suddenly, those same races aren't all there. And I like this idea. I like that, because if we look at species and races in our real world, they come from different spots. That's usually due to geography and various different cultures and whatnot. So if we can take that, if we can understand what each of our places is based off of, then we can understand the overarching themes and what races would go into that. In another one of my worlds where it's mostly islands, I put the Tritons, I put the Grung, I put the Yuan-Ti, I even put Sea Elves, because Sea Elves are pretty cool. But for Akan, this is the continent where I claim everything started. So let's start off with the fact that Akan, in my world, is the cultural center point. This is where everything started. We can track back and say that's where our society began. Now, my world's history starts with the reign of a devil god that took over, and if you're interested in how my timeline works, go ahead and check out that video. It's there. But for the sake of brevity, a devil god took over, wiped everyone's memory, and so everyone remembers starting there at that point, Akan. Eventually, the devil god is brushed off and taken over. At that point, though, a lot of the races have started to spread out a little bit. They want to claim lands for themselves. Some of them do it because they just don't want to have to deal with the remembering of it. Some do it because they just have a natural want to explore, halflings. So they start to splinter off and go off in their own separate ways. So for Akan, let's stop and think. What races would stay in Akan? So Akan has a few different settings going on. You know, it's got the Roman analog, it's got the Eastern Arabic going on, it's got some Persian, and then it also has some African safari in a different part of the continent. Started to think, what were some races that would just naturally fit in there? And honestly, for the safari part, I thought a centaur would fit perfectly as just a naturally occurring race there. Like ones that have existed there for as long as people knew. They were like, that was their land, that was where they're from. And then I put the satyrs there. I know they're not official yet, but they're coming in the new book. I put the satyrs there because, you know, just makes sense. I know they're mostly a Greek thing. The fun thing about this is you can change what the meaning behind a certain race is. So we have the satyrs and the centaurs. They're what I call the naturally occurring races. They're the ones who've existed there for as long as history has expected it to. This would be the equivalent of the grung, living in my archipelago area. Continuing in the predominant races, we also have the tiefling. Tieflings didn't really exist in my world until the devil god took over. He found certain humans that could be influenced, and through that, their lineage sparked the tieflings. And so, unfortunately, there is that moniker that if you're a tiefling, someone in your family worked with the devil god. But that might not always be the case. For example, there's so many different types of tiefling subraces now that someone could be a tiefling and not have affiliated themselves with the Forsaken One. But most people aren't going to care because you're a tiefling. So from that standpoint, tieflings aren't really going to explore and go out with the races a lot. They're going to want to stay centralized, you know, start their own cultures and whatnot. Hopefully people don't want to deal with them too much. The other main race I wanted to stay put, while all these other races are kind of going out and exploring, I wanted another handbook race to stay put. I started to think, what race could that be? And then I decided maybe it's not a full race, it's a sub-race. So in my world, each sub-race of elves exists in a different continent. So the High Elves, why did I keep them here? Well, as we've discussed in the video where we went into further detail on creating a nation, Ikarum is very much a kingdom that is based off of magic and the strongest magic. Add that in with the fact that we know Rexilus is a kingdom, and there might be other kingdoms. High Elves are very much the prim and proper. We are snooty, and we love it. It made sense to me that the High Elves would want to stay there and just further define the kingdoms rather than going off and making their own. They're very snooty that way. So now that we have like the natural races, I started to think, okay, that's cool, but what other races could we add in? What are some of the extravagant ones? So these next 5 races that I've added to be here are basically the races that I was having a hard time figuring out where they would belong in my world. The next 5 are the Aasimar, Kalashtar, the Genasi, Vedalken, and the Gith. Now the Genasi and the Aasimar, you could just say they're anywhere, you can just have them anywhere. Again, that's preference, but I wanted them to exist in one world. So you know, the Genasi and the Aasimar are basically equivalent to tieflings in the sense that they are humans that have had interactions with either genies, elementals, or angels. And so in my world, it makes sense that they would also be native to Akan, the cultural center point. This idea that while the devil god was reigning, these other entities tried to get influence in one way, shape, or form into the material plane, and so in certain cases the best they could do was send one angel or one elemental, and they interacted with humans in some way, not like that, to cause their lineage to become these new beings. And so it made sense to me that if we're going to have tieflings there, we should also have the Aasimar and the Genasi there as well in that continent. Now the Kalashtar, Vedalken, and the Gith, they're confusing. The Gith we already know are an extraplanar race. They were enslaved by mind flayers and then decided, no, we ain't doing that anymore. And I tried to think of what would cause the Gith to be in my world. And then it started to click a little bit more. If the Forsaken One had been taken down and suddenly the material plane was now open back up to everybody, a bunch of people would want to go and visit the material plane again. So all of a sudden these other planar races, the Gith, show up and they're like, you know, we will stay here because you clearly, you humans, elves, you clearly messed up. We're going to stay here and we're going to fix you guys. Knowing that there's extraplanar races coming in, that kind of starts to make sense now for what I can do with the Kalashtar and the Vedalken. See, in Eberron lore, the Kalashtar are like these half spirit people, or they have like they're connected to the dream plane. It's kind of confusing to me still, mainly because I'm not really a huge Eberron lore fan. And the Vedalken are just blue things. How do you justify those in your world? Maybe these are some of the ancient civilizations that were able to escape before the Devil God took over, and they decided to come back now that he's gone. They're starting to create their own worlds and their own societies back up, but is it going to work? So the Kalashtar, Vedalken, the Gith, all of these extraplanal races would come back, and then they just stay in the like continent where like culture started back up again. And what this does is this allows me that if I ever get another weird race like the Kalashtar or the Vedalken, I can just add them in and be like, ah, yes, you're just a new race who has decided to move into the material plane. You're existing where all the other planar races are from. So again, to quickly go over the prominent races, you have the Centaur and the Stag, which are just like the natives, the native race. The High Elf, the Tiefling, and even the Aasimar and Genasi a little bit. They're the ones that, while they weren't native there, it made sense that they would stay. And then, of course, the extraplanar races that just came in and they're like, we're going to stay here too. Now, you may be thinking, now, Frank, well, you didn't mention humans at all. Well, that's because I do have other categories. So even though each area of my world has specific races tied to it, they're just the main races. Those are the ones you're going to see most of the time. They'll exist, not to say they won't exist in other areas, but they're predominantly here. It's not like in a con, dwarves wouldn't be there. They're just not as prominent as, say, High Elves, Tiefling, and Aasimar. I do have races that can just exist anywhere. I didn't want to limit it. So humans, I didn't want to restrict humans to just one place. Also, it kind of helps with this idea of like Furbolg, who are like half giant, that it makes sense that in order to have that happen, humans have to be there. But I started to think, what other races exist, could exist anywhere, aren't defined to one continent or another? And that came up with the Revenant. The Revenant is a sub-race. I don't think we've ever even gotten official stuff for it yet. We might have, but I'm not sure. The idea of the Revenant is basically you died and for whatever reason some entity brought you back, but now you have an obligation or a duty you have to set out to fulfill before your soul can rest. That's really cool and shouldn't be defined to a specific location. Anyone should be able to do that. But obviously there's a huge asterisk there. There's restrictions around how you become a Revenant. Meanwhile, Damfer, which is a homebrew thing I found on DM's Guild, I might link it if I can find the link, they're half vampires. And the idea of the half vampire is the same thing. Like, vampires can really exist anywhere, so why should I limit where the vampires are? Because what if I have a cool idea for a vampire in one setting or another? It shouldn't be limited. So there, again, an asterisk stating that, well, if you're a Damfer there, that means there's a vampire somewhere nearby. So those are my available everywhere races, the human, Revenant, and the Damfer. It's possible some other races might come in there, ones that are more locked in. I think Matt Mercer came up with a Hollowed one, which is a subclass. That would fit into this kind of available everywhere with a little asterisk. And then finally, I have my limited races. I'm kind of stealing this from Matt Colville, his video where he goes into like major, minor, and all of these races, except I'm condensing it to there's the major races, the limited races, the ones that can exist anywhere but in limited quantities. I put this here because, you know, sometimes people have this idea of a character they want to build, and I don't want to have to then justify it to my players. Well, okay, why do they make sense? So I came up with the limited. These are the races that can exist anywhere in small quandaries, small amounts. So first off, anything in the player's handbook, any race that exists there, it can exist in any one of them. I mainly did this because that's the book everyone's going to have. I didn't want to limit things too much. I do like the idea that there's the major races, but again, people really like the player's handbook races. I don't want to take that away from them. As I've stated before, the Aasimar, the Tiefling, the Genasi, those can exist anywhere. Changelings I've put wherever the heck I want because they're changelings. They can literally live incognito. I can have an entire society of changelings and no one would know. And that's perfect because I can just retcon and no one will know. Shifters can kind of exist anywhere in small quandaries. Furbolgs I put in there because they're half giants. Giants exist everywhere. Therefore Furbolgs can be anywhere because humans, man, they really like making things half them. And then the last thing I put just a general term of beast folk. That's, you know, your tabaxi, your turtles, all of those. They can exist in small populations anywhere to an extent. So ultimately that's how I do it. I have a main race for each area. I have the races that are available everywhere, though some do come with an asterisk. And then I have the limited races, which are ones you can pick from if you're not enjoying any of the main race options, but still don't put too much work in on my part. So anyway, yeah, that's it for today. I don't know how long this video is because editing's a thing. If you enjoyed this video, please comment below what you want me to do. I think the next video we're gonna do is working on a faction because I have a cool idea for that. So until then, tell your friends, like the video, subscribe because we only got 10 subscribers. It'd be cool if we had more. And yeah, that's about it. I gotta still think of a sign off. In fact, I might not think of a sign off because laziness.